Sherlock Holmes and the Hunt for the Monster's Master. Chapter 1, The Letter from Dunwich Castle. Some cries for help are not written in ink, but in fear that has dried up in every stroke of the pen. That morning, just as the sun pierced through the curtains of the sitting room on Baker Street, I was lighting my second cigarette when Holmes walked in from outside, holding a letter the color of ash gray. It bore no seal, no return address. His face was grave, his eyes lit up with a familiar glint, the look of a man who had just caught the scent of a mystery worth pursuing. I set my cigarette down in the ashtray and waited for him to speak. Holmes placed the letter on the table, flipping it over as if to confirm it truly existed. Then he sat down and began speaking slowly. The letter came from a man named Dunwich, Count Edmund Dunwich, the 13th Lord of an ancient lineage long secluded in the northern highlands of England. The content of the letter was not long, but each word bled onto the page like droplets of blood. He spoke of a monster. Not an ordinary beast. Not a wolf, a wild bear, or any known predator of the mountains. But something else, something soulless, fearless, neither alive nor dead. And that monster, according to the Count, was being controlled by an unseen hand, a hidden figure, known by no one, remembered by none, yet still present in the shadows of the castle. I asked Holmes if this might be some twisted hoax. A recluse with a mind unhinged by delusion? Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed me the letter and pointed to the back, where the writer, in trembling script, had added one final line. No one here dares speak his name. The darkness has a new master. If you do not come, I fear I shall no longer be myself when the full moon rises. 2 days later, we set off. The journey took us through mist-covered moors, barren hills, and fields long abandoned by human voice. The farther north we traveled, the more the wind seemed to cut through flesh, not merely from the cold, but from the unshakable sensation that we were being watched from behind. At a small roadside stop, the old coachman widened his eyes upon hearing us mention Dunwich Castle. He clenched his hands and whispered as though exhaling. "You gentlemen are going up there? That place has been forsaken for over a decade. On every bright full moon, folks still see fire on the tower and hear howling that lasts until morning." I turned to Holmes, expecting him to scoff. But he merely nodded, as though this only confirmed something already forming in his mind. At dusk on the third day, Dunwich Castle emerged on the horizon like a charcoal stain on a leaden sky. There were no flags, no guards, no signs of life. The stone walls were overgrown with moss, the wooden doors rotted through, and in the upper windows loomed vague silhouettes, as if the castle itself were watching us. We knocked using a rusted brass knocker. Nearly 2 full minutes passed before the door creaked open, revealing an aged face, the butler, whose features had been warped by time into something statuesque. He said nothing, merely led us silently inside. The air within the castle was thick and stifling, as if the stone walls had absorbed centuries of silence, fear, and something else unnamed. Every footstep echoed like a coffin nail through the endless halls. Count Edmund Dunwich awaited us in the reading room, where the only light came from a fireplace reduced to embers. He sat in an old leather chair, eyes sunken, skin pale as parchment, and his voice hoarse like something risen from a crypt. He offered no greeting, no pleasantries, only stared at Holmes and said, "You had to arrive before the next full moon. If not, it will escape." I thought I had misheard. Holmes made no reaction. He sat opposite the Count and spoke in a voice both gentle and forceful. "Count Dunwich, tell us everything you know. From the beginning. No secrets. No omissions." And he told us about the legend of the Dunwich family, how an ancestor long ago brought back a being from an expedition in Egypt, something not of the human world. A nameless entity, without fixed shape, that only manifested when summoned. Through the generations, it had been sealed in the deepest dungeon beneath the castle. But now, the Count believed, someone, a descendant working in secret, was trying to awaken it. Not to destroy, but to control. Holmes asked. Do you have proof? The Count pointed toward the high window, where the crescent moon hung in the sky. Every moonlit night, I hear footsteps in the dungeon. But no one in the house dares descend. And by morning, there are claw marks, on the walls, on the stone floor. Marks that could not have been made by any man. I asked. And what about people? Has anyone been attacked? The Count gripped the arms of his chair tightly. My former maid, Magda, disappeared a month ago. The police came, searched the premises, then left. They claimed she ran away. But no one leaves this castle and leaves their eyes behind. He trailed off, his voice trembling. We found her eyes at the base of the tower. No body. Just the eyes, still wet. That night, I could not sleep. Dunwich Castle seemed to breathe, creaking beams, whispering drafts, the imagined scrape of claws against stone. Holmes paced endlessly, always holding his small leather notebook, where he jotted down details only he could see the value in. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard a faint clattering beneath the floorboards. A small stone slab had been pushed aside, and from it emerged Holmes, dust-covered, holding a small specimen that looked like charred leather. He said to me, "There's a chamber beneath the library, sealed by 4 layers of brick. Someone opened it recently, and left traces of something not human." I asked, "Animal hide?" Holmes shook his head. "No. It's a kind of skin that, when touched, feels like nothing. As if it doesn't fully exist in this world." The next morning, the Count was gone. The library doors were wide open. No signs of struggle. No blood. No sound. Only a single folded note lay on the ebony table. On it, a single line, written in handwriting that was not the Count's. "You arrived too late. Now, it's only me in it." Holmes stood silently for a long moment, then turned to me. His voice was low and dry, like wind over gravel. "Watson, this is no monster. This is a chessboard. And we've just lost the first pawn." Chapter 2, A Strange Encounter in the Mist. There are warnings that do not come in words, but in the eyes of those who have survived a horror too dreadful to name. We left Dunwich Castle on the second morning, after Count Edmund vanished into the night along with that cryptic, defiant note. Holmes said we needed to go to the village of Dunwich, a centuries-old settlement about 2 miles south of the castle, once home to servants, hunters, and the laborers who had served the Dunwich family in generations past. The path led through a gloomy chestnut forest, thick with a chilling mist. The trees did not seem to grow naturally, their trunks twisted, their dry branches jutted out like the fingers of drowned corpses clawing at the light. The fog was so dense it felt tangible, like a damp veil draped over our faces, necks, and limbs, carrying with it the musty scent of improperly buried corpses. Holmes walked ahead, cane in hand, his steps sure, his eyes as sharp as ever. Yet I noticed he was more cautious than usual, occasionally stopping to press his ear to the ground or sweep aside mist to examine the path for tracks. Not a word wasted, not a motion uncalculated. At the edge of the village, we were stopped. 7 people. 3 men, 4 women. Their faces were weathered like stone statues from the Northern Isles, hands tightly gripping hoes, clubs, and an old crossbow. They did not charge at us, did not shout. They simply stood across the path like a living wall, barring the way for outsiders. The tallest man, with a tangled gray beard, stepped forward. He said, "You should turn back. This is not a place for those who seek answers. He who asks too many questions will lose his voice. He who looks too deep will lose his eyes." Holmes stepped forward without flinching. "We are here to find Count Dunwich. He has gone missing." The man did not move. "If he has gone into the dungeon, he is no longer himself. Whatever lives in that castle does not let anyone return unchanged. A young woman stepped out from behind the crowd. Her eyes were deep and still, her dark brown hair fell like a soundless stream. She could not have been older than 20, but her face bore no trace of youth, only the weariness of someone aged by unspeakable things. She looked at Holmes, then turned to me. No fear. No hesitation. It only appears when the moon is full. And the one who controls it lives among us. Not everyone can see him, but everyone feels him. Each time someone disappears, the moon is full that night. And the next morning, the dogs stop barking. A chill ran down my spine. Holmes, expressionless, asked. You've seen it? The girl nodded. I saw it at the forest's edge. Twice the height of a man. Hunched back, skin without color, fingernails like blades. But it never walks alone. There's always a figure ahead. A smaller one. Thin. Limping. Walking with a cane. The gray-bearded man growled quietly and reached out to pull her back, but she stepped away, keeping distance from both us and them. I don't want anyone else to die. If you find him, kill him. Don't arrest him. Don't ask why. There is only one way: when he stops breathing, it will stop appearing. It was a statement that should have sounded mad. But when she said it, there was no hysteria in her eyes, only a kind of desperate clarity, the sort born from accepting the unexplainable as the only truth. Holmes handed her a slip of paper and a pencil. She wrote down the names of those who had gone missing recently. 12 names. Men and women. Old and young. No discernible pattern. At the bottom, she added a single line. All disappeared on nights of the full moon. All lived near the stream to the east. We left the village as the sun began to set. My back was still cold from the words we had heard. Holmes walked beside me, silent for most of the way, only speaking when the sunset bathed the woods in blood-red light. Watson, he said, that girl wasn't lying. But she doesn't know the whole truth either. I looked at him, waiting for an explanation. Holmes said. The one who controls that thing doesn't live among them. He hides behind their beliefs. He feeds off the fear they hold inside. That is the finest nourishment for creatures like him. I asked. What is that thing, Holmes? A creature? A murderer cloaked in superstition? Holmes didn't answer directly. He only said something that made my skin crawl. I'm not certain that it's alive. But I am certain it has a master. That night, we returned to the castle. The wind howled like grieving spirits across the wastelands. As we stood before the gate, I turned back, and for a brief moment, I saw someone standing on the path leading to the village. No face. No shadow. But unmistakably a figure. Holmes saw it too. He said nothing, only turned toward the entrance and murmured. Tomorrow we go to the eastern stream. I nodded, my hand still gripping the pistol inside my coat. Not because I thought I would need to fire it, but because I felt as though I were carrying a twig into a forest of wolves. At dawn, the mist had yet to lift. I awoke to the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. Opening my door, I saw Holmes already outside in the courtyard, staring in the direction of the setting moon. He said, "Tomorrow night is the full moon. And I believe we will meet it. But first, Watson, we must find the smaller shadow that walks ahead of the monster." I turned to look at the castle, where every stone seemed to be waiting. And I knew, what we were about to face was no longer just a case. It was a hunt between man and a mind that hid itself in the dark, where the light of reason only made the shadows more profound. Chapter 3, Claw Marks on the Stone Wall. A predator never leaves traces, unless it wants you to know that you are the one being hunted. The next morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the dense fog blanketing the Dunwich highlands, Holmes stood before the eastern door of the castle, the one that connected a side corridor to the ancient ramparts, long abandoned. He said nothing, merely gestured for me to bring a lantern and thick gloves. The path leading to the stone wall behind the castle had once been barricaded with rotting wooden planks, but last night, someone, or something, had torn through them. The wood was shredded, splinters scattered across the path, as if a silent storm-bearing claws had swept through. Holmes knelt to examine each splintered break, then stood, eyes following a trail of marks that led into the darkened corridor. I lit the lantern, its pale yellow beam sweeping across the stone wall, and both of us froze. There, on the cold surface of the stone, were claw marks, not made by human hands, nor by any animal I had ever encountered. Deep, jagged gouges ran upward from low to high, as though the wall had been raked by iron talons. Each mark was deliberate, savage. Some were nearly 2 centimeters deep, as wide as 3 adult fingers. Not the work of ordinary tools. Not wild beasts. Not a prank. But what drew Holmes's attention even more, were the footprints beside them. Not one, but a trail. Medium-sized footprints, skewed slightly to the left, each step lightly yet clearly imprinted in the dust-covered ground. The left sole worn more than the right, suggesting a limp. The steps ran parallel to the claw marks, no fleeing, no signs of panic. As if, accompanying. Holmes knelt by one of the prints, gloved fingers gently brushing its edge. This person watched while it clawed, he murmured. Not prey. A companion. A chill ran down my spine. He continued tracking the trail to a hidden corner of the wall. There, a small opening, like an old furnace vent sealed with stone, had been forced open. A large chunk had been torn away, revealing a narrow gap within. I shone the lantern inside. Nothing but a tight, sloping passage descending underground. The air that wafted out was dank, metallic, and reeked of old ash, as if from a long-forgotten crematorium. Holmes looked at me. It doesn't move alone. It has a guide. And I believe that person is not far from here. He took out a rope, tying one end around his waist and the other to a stone pillar nearby. I held the lantern as Holmes crawled into the narrow opening. I wouldn't let him go alone. Just a few steps later, I slid in after him, the lantern's beam trembling through the cramped, murky space, as though we were descending into the throat of a creature long dead, yet not fully decayed. We crawled only a short distance before the passage opened into a small stone chamber. And there, unexpectedly, was no abandoned room, but an altar. To what, we could not tell. But the symbol carved into the central stone silenced us both. A twin spiral, encircled by 8 broken arms, each ending in long, sharp claws, reaching outward as if to seize the observer. On the altar, a small blackened wooden idol, charred at the base. And beside it, a cane. An old wooden cane, curved at the head, worn and battered. Dried blood stained the shaft. The shape of it instantly told me, it matched the limp of the person who had left those prints. Holmes picked up the cane, rotating it. Etched into the bottom was a small symbol, the same kind found in the ancient books within the castle's library, those which only Count Edmund was allowed to touch. Holmes said quietly. This man has lived here for many years. And he is no stranger, he is of Dunwich blood. I was incredulous. You mean Count Edmund? No. Not Edmund. Edmund is too weak to control this. But there was someone else. He led me back out of the crevice. As we emerged into daylight, Holmes stared intently toward the western tower of the castle. The one sealed off after a fire 20 years ago. He said. The Dunwich family records mention an eldest son, Edmund's older brother, thought to be mad, a fanatic, locked away by their father in the tower to avoid scandal. The records say he died in the fire. But no body was ever found. Only a charred cloth and this cane remained. I understood at once. You suspect he's still alive? And that he controls the creature from the shadows? No. He doesn't control it. He summons it. Feeds it. And now, he is its eyes in this world. Holmes turned back to the stone wall, where the claw marks still crumbled fine dust from the grooves, and I knew the nightmare was far from over. Tomorrow night would be a full moon. And someone, or something, was preparing to appear again. Not just to kill, but to say something. The question was, would we hear it, before there was no one left to listen? Chapter 4, Death in a Locked Room. No door is secure when the killer has no need to cross the threshold. That morning, while the mist still hung heavy over the ancient rooftops of Dunwich Castle, a scream rang out from the second floor, shattering the silence that had seemed unchanged for 1,000 years. Holmes and I were seated in the drawing room, his eyes contemplative as though weaving together a thread of invisible clues, when the scream made him rise instantly. We rushed up the stone staircase leading to the old corridor that connected the servants' quarters. Count Edmund, pale as a sheet, stood trembling outside a door that was tightly locked from the inside. A maid, weeping, pointed at the handle. No one could get in. It's locked from the inside. But, there were sounds. Then silence. Holmes knelt to examine the lock. There were no signs of tampering. No scratches. Everything was intact, as if the person inside had secured the door themselves before whatever happened took place. Holmes requested a crowbar. When the door was forced open, the stench of death mingled with the thick, moldy air of the room, so pungent I had to turn away. The servant, Gareth, lay motionless on the floor, his body twisted as if tortured. His neck was bent sharply to one side, collarbone protruding from torn skin. His arms were not broken, but curled at impossible angles. His face contorted, mouth agape as though screaming, too late. No windows. No other exits. Only a small bed, a wooden table, and an oil lamp still flickering, casting warped yellow shadows on the stone walls. Holmes did not look at the body. He looked up at the ceiling. Then he knelt to examine the flagstone floor. His fingers brushed along the wall, then stopped at one spot. A faint scratch. Not blood. A streak where dust had been wiped away. He pulled out a magnifying lens, inspecting the wall's surface where the dust had vanished, then turned to check beneath the table. There, near the edge of the floor, a small wooden plank had been recently moved. Using his knife, he pried it loose, revealing a gap no wider than a hand. Not large enough for a person, but just right for a rope. Or a claw. Holmes said to me. It didn't enter through the door. It didn't need to. Someone guided it through another route, via the old ventilation system, to carry this out from afar. Not an assassin. A tool. The manipulator is still hiding, somewhere close. I stood frozen. How can someone be killed in a sealed room without anyone entering? How can a body be broken without any fingerprints or visible claw marks? And how, unless with a human intellect, could death be orchestrated like a game of chess? Holmes continued searching the room. Beneath the bed, he found a patch of skin, not human, stained with dried blood and a few strands of hair. The skin was wrinkled, rough like the bark of a charred tree, yet exuded a foul, riverbed stench, like something rotting underwater. Not a monster. The hide of something that once lived. Or was being kept alive against nature. Holmes returned to the table. He opened a drawer. Inside, a small, crumpled scrap of paper, bearing only a few trembling lines. It knows I saw it. I hear the whispers behind the wall. When the moon returns, it will not just kill me. Below that, only a spreading blot of ink, as though the writer's hand had stopped moving at that very moment. Holmes folded the note and stood up. Gareth wasn't the target. He was merely someone who saw what he wasn't meant to. But what troubles me more, is that the killer knew he saw. I looked at Holmes. You mean, someone is watching us? Every step. Holmes nodded. And not from the forest. From within the castle. I glanced around. The air in the room seemed to freeze. This sealed chamber, thought to be a place of refuge, was, in truth, the perfect trap. Holmes murmured. The manipulator doesn't just want to kill. He wants to prove he can, at any time. In any space. Without anyone ever touching him. I asked. A person like that, what is he waiting for? Holmes looked up at the faint imprint of moonlight on the thick curtains. He's not waiting. He's luring us. Step by step. Into a place where he controls everything. A gust of wind howled through the corridor, and a chill ran down my spine. And next time, it might not just be a servant. Chapter 5, The Madman and the Whispers in the Wind. Terror does not always arrive with a scream. Sometimes, it comes as a whisper in nameless winds. That evening, as night cast its shadow over Dunwich Castle and the mist clung thick as cobwebs to every time-worn stone, Holmes and I were led by Count Edmund down to the old storage wing, where the only surviving servant was being kept, to avoid alarming those still unaware of the horrors that had occurred. The man's name was Walter. A large, middle-aged man, once a veteran who had served in the north, but now little more than a trembling shell of himself. Holmes observed him from a distance, then motioned for me to remain silent. Walter sat huddled in a corner, hands clamped tightly over his ears, his eyes vacant and staring into some invisible darkness. His lips moved constantly, uttering a voice so low and chilling it raised the hairs on my neck. It comes when the wind sings, it comes when the wind sings, he speaks, in words not of men. I stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Walter recoiled, jerking violently, his eyes wide with panic, as if I were the very thing he most feared. Holmes didn't move closer. He stood at the threshold, his gaze scanning the darkness more than the broken man before us. I asked softly. Who came, Walter? What did you see? Walter gave no answer. He kept repeating, like a broken, malfunctioning machine. The wind sings. It hears, no eyes, no heart, but it hears every voice, he whispers to it, behind the walls, behind the ceiling, behind the blood. Holmes stepped forward and slowly took a small object from his coat pocket, a piece of amethyst engraved with a strange spiral symbol. He held it up before Walter. The man's vacant eyes suddenly widened. He scrambled backward against the wall, mouth open in a silent scream, then collapsed to the floor, body shaking as if something had just stripped his soul bare. Holmes stooped to retrieve the stone and murmured. He's not afraid of the stone. It's the symbol. I asked. What is that symbol? Holmes replied quietly. It's the mark of an ancient cult, wiped out in Eastern Europe over 2 centuries ago. They believed they could summon entities from beyond reality, through sound, through wind, through repeated speech. A chill ran down my spine. Walter lay curled on the floor, trembling, still repeating the last part of his chant. He speaks. Not a human voice, not a human voice. Holmes gently knelt, placing his hand on Walter's forehead. A rare gesture of empathy from a man who so often kept his distance. His eyes narrowed slightly. He said. Walter isn't mad. His brain is still functioning. No signs of neurological damage. He's just lost. I didn't understand. Lost? Holmes answered. His mind was pulled onto a different rhythm. An ancient form of hypnosis. Not through eyes or a swinging pendant, but through sound. Through frequencies the ear can perceive but the brain cannot fully comprehend. He pointed up at the ceiling beams. When wind flows through gaps in stone, it creates vibrations. If someone knew how to design the walls, how to embed conduits for sound behind each ancient layer of masonry, they could make the wind carry messages anywhere. I whispered. You mean, someone is using the entire castle as an instrument? Holmes nodded. And playing a tune only one creature can understand. I turned back to Walter. He was weeping. But no tears came. Only the hollow gasps of a child abandoned at the edge of darkness. Suddenly, from somewhere deep in the castle, a gust of wind howled. Cold. Long. And with a rhythm. Walter screamed, clutching his head, shouting. No. Not again. Don't make me hear it. Don't make me hear it. Holmes immediately signaled. I rushed to cover Walter's ears, but it was too late. He collapsed, limp, as if something had drained the last trace of life from his body. Holmes whispered. The manipulator isn't merely hiding. He's experimenting. Testing if he can control people through fear. Through wind. Through the disorientation of the human mind. I looked at him, alarmed. You think, who is he? A priest? A scientist? A madman? Holmes answered. He's a mathematician in the guise of a sorcerer. And he's turning all of us into notes in his deadly symphony. We rose and left the room where Walter lay. Holmes said nothing more. But his eyes did not look down the corridor. Nor at me. He looked into the cracks in the walls. As though the night wind was sending him a warning, in a language only he was beginning to understand. Chapter 6, The Ancient Script and the Sealed Chamber. Every mystery has an origin, but only those who dare to peer into the deepest roots will ever grasp the true horror behind it. After the night when Walter screamed in his fevered delirium, Holmes did not rest. While I lay tossing and turning in the cold room of the castle, he was already pacing the halls in silence, his eyes sharp as razors, scanning every ancient stone, every time-worn painting. The next morning, I found him in the old library, a room which, according to Count Edmund, had been abandoned for decades. The bookshelves were warped and seemed ready to collapse. The air was thick with mildew and the dust of ages, forming a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. But Holmes paid it no mind. He was crouched behind a toppled shelf, his fingers tracing strange carvings on the surface of black stone. I stepped closer. Under the dim light of an oil lamp, lines of script emerged as if etched from a nameless world, curved, tangled, and defying any linguistic structure I had ever seen. I asked softly. Not Latin. Not Greek. Not even Arabic. Then what is it? Holmes replied in an even tone. It doesn't belong to any European language family. In fact, it lies entirely outside the logic of human linguistics. This is a form of protoscript, found only in scattered records of prehistoric tribes from the Caucasus and the northern fringes of ancient Iran. There's no grammar. Only repeating symbols, mantras, chants meant to resonate with forces only otherworldly ears could comprehend. I swallowed hard. Holmes drew a hand-copied sketch from his pocket. 3 symbols had been circled in red ink. He said. These 3 match the symbols I saw on the stone last night. And they also appear on the pattern engraved atop the brass candlestick that was buried beneath the chapel. These symbols recur everywhere, the sealed door, the old altar, and now the library. I asked. Where do you think they lead? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, nudging the bookshelf aside. Behind the layers of dust and moss was a stone wall, completely different from the rest of the library. No mortar, no bricks, just a smooth slab of almost seamless rock. But in its center was a shallowly carved circle, barely visible except when the light hit it just right. Holmes placed his hand in the circle. It was slightly concave, just enough to accommodate a fingertip. As he rotated it gently clockwise, a dry, grinding sound echoed, like bone scraping against bone. Then, the stone walls slowly shifted. Behind it lay a narrow corridor, descending deep into the earth. I asked, "What is this place? How could the Count not know of it?" Holmes answered, "Sealed off at least 3 generations ago. Likely, the Dunwich family themselves tried to bury it forever. But then, someone within the bloodline awakened what had been forgotten. We lit our lamps and entered. The air was bitter cold, as if centuries of isolation had frozen the very stones. Our footsteps echoed with an unnatural resonance, each beat stretching, as though something were mimicking our every move." Holmes paused before a closed stone doorway. On it was another line of ancient script, this time carved deeply, so deeply it had nearly eroded the surface. He studied it for a moment, then translated slowly. "Down here there is no life. No light. No soul shall leave. He who awakens shall be heard." A shiver ran down my spine. Holmes said, "It might be a real warning. Or a deterrent, meant to keep outsiders from discovering the family's most terrible secrets." He stood silent for a moment, then gently touched the stone edge. The door creaked open. A thin mist rose from within, cold, and laced with the scent of rusted iron and sulfur. The chamber was pitch black, but Holmes stepped inside without hesitation, as though he were more at home in darkness than in light. I followed, my palm tightening around the lantern. The chamber wasn't large, just a circular space, with 8 stone pillars arranged evenly around the perimeter. Each was etched with strange, unfamiliar symbols. In the center stood a low stone platform, covered in dust, but the carved grooves were still visible, like tiny rivers spiraling toward a central point. Holmes crouched down, his fingers tracing the channels, his expression darkening. He said, "This is a ritual site." Blood poured into the grooves, flowing inward. It required sound, wind, and the correct rhythm to awaken something. I asked, "What kind of something?" Holmes replied, "A soulless monster. Or an entity their ancestors once called a god." We stood there, in the cold chamber, surrounded by symbols not of this world, as wind began to whistle through a small gap in the ceiling. For the first time in my life, I heard wind that did not sound like wind. It sounded like a voice, drawn out, warped, without any mouth to shape it. Holmes whispered, "He's listening. Not to us." He glanced around once more, then pointed to a disturbance in the dust, faint drag marks just behind the altar. "Someone has been here. Recently. And took something with them." Chapter 7, The Breath of the Demon. Horrific truths are never merely buried beneath the earth, they breathe, ragged and urgent, in the deepest dark, waiting for the day they will be revealed. Holmes and I stood in the chamber, the air thick as if compressed by centuries of secrets and suffering. The flickering light from our lantern cast wavering shadows upon the cold stone walls, illuminating traces that Holmes's keen eyes quickly picked out. At the center of the room lay a rusted iron cage, toppled to one side. Its bars were twisted, most corroded nearly to dust, with only a few remaining intact. On the ground around it, dark crimson stains, old blood, dried and hardened into the stone, suggested violence long past. Nearby, broken chains of iron lay scattered, their jagged edges and sheer force of rupture hinting at some unnatural strength having torn them apart. Holmes gently touched the bloodstain, his eyes sharpened with intense concentration. I asked, my voice hoarse, "What is that smell in here, Holmes? There's a bitter taste in the air, pungent, like sulfur, from the depths of hell." He replied, his tone low, as though sensing something beyond science. "It is the breath of something not of this world. Sulfur, rusted iron, and perhaps a trace of ammonia. These are the markers of an ancient, unnatural power." Suddenly, a faint sound echoed through the chamber. A low, drawn-out moan reverberating from deep within the earth. It wasn't wind, nor dripping water, it was breathing, or the groan of a creature long imprisoned, or perhaps the echo of a nightmare still bound in chains. I shivered, glancing around for the source of the haunting noise, but everything remained still, except for that chilling sound. Holmes lowered his voice, staring directly at me. This sound is no accident. It's the echo of whatever was once imprisoned inside that iron cage. He crouched and pulled a fallen iron bar from the floor with a sharp clang of metal. This cage was not merely a trap. It was designed to restrain an invisible force, to lock away an entity capable of unraveling reason and stirring endless terror. Holmes circled the area, searching for further signs. He pointed to deep scratches etched into the stone near the cage. These weren't made by inanimate objects. They're the marks of claws, sharp, struggling, furious. Whatever was held here fought against its chains with all its might. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined a powerful creature, imprisoned in this underground cell, thrashing against ancient steel links hour after hour. Holmes murmured. Someone, or something, freed it. Or is trying to control it. He turned to a nearby wall where strange ancient symbols were deeply carved. The wavering lantern light made the symbols seem to ripple and writhe in the shadows. Suddenly, Holmes froze, tilting his head to listen. The moaning sound faded, then surged again, like the breathing of something close. He looked back at me, eyes sharp. This sound may be a message, or a curse. It may summon, or repel. I could feel the tension in the air, something that defied all rational explanation. Holmes carefully laid his hand on the broken chains, never taking his eyes off the smallest of details. Thinking of the person, or thing, behind it all, I asked. Who do you think freed it? Or is trying to control it? Holmes replied, voice heavy. Someone with deep knowledge of ancient sorcery. A mind ruthless and cunning enough to toy with forces that have slumbered for centuries. He turned to the cage and whispered. This cage once marked the boundary between life and death, between order and chaos. And now, that boundary has been torn open. I could not help but recall the horrors we had witnessed, the servant dead in a sealed room, the monstrous claw marks on the stone walls, and now this, an iron cage and the unrelenting groans echoing in the dark. Holmes turned to me, eyes glinting coldly. We are no longer in the world of conventional science, Watson. This is a realm where mythology and nightmare converge. He continued. The hunt isn't over. What awaits us is not merely a mindless beast, but an intellect manipulating the darkness itself. We stood there, in that pitch-black chamber, where the breath of the demon still echoed, over and over. Like a chilling warning from the past. Chapter 8, The Lunar Calendar and the Strange Disappearances. In the darkness of the unexplained, time is always the cruelest enemy, exposing secrets when we least expect it. After leaving the damp, suffocating cellar, Holmes returned to the study within Dunwich Castle, where a large wooden table was cluttered with old papers, maps, and case files spanning decades. The dim candlelight was just enough to illuminate the faded writing, but not enough to ease the tension hanging in the air. Holmes sat down, his eyes fixed on an old journal and several reports of disappearances in the region. I remained by his side, silently observing the rare intensity of his focus. After leafing through the documents for a while, Holmes nodded as though he had just uncovered something important. The disappearances around the castle are not random. Every one of them occurred on a full moon night, or very near to the full moon. He continued, deep in thought. Someone has been calculating very precisely, acting according to the lunar cycle. This shows method and accuracy, this cannot be dismissed. I asked, what does that mean for us, Holmes? He replied. The full moon exerts unique influences over many things, tides, creatures, and even human psychology. Whoever is controlling the monster is surely using that to incite or command it. Holmes traced the dates recorded in the journal with his finger. This is a lunar calendar of the Dunwich Highlands spanning several years. Every full moon night corresponds with a disappearance, or some bizarre occurrence. I looked at the pages, which displayed a series of dates and numbers meticulously marked. Not a single incident fell outside the cycle. Holmes continued. There's more. I've discovered another intriguing pattern. The disappearances not only coincide with full moons, but also occur during nights of heavy rain or thick fog. He glanced out the window, where a dense fog now cloaked the land, obscuring everything from view. The unease in his eyes deepened as he spoke. The one controlling the monster uses the weather as cover, taking advantage of the fog and rain to mask traces and render evidence even harder to grasp. He emphasized. Only someone highly intelligent, with a knowledge of both meteorology and astronomy, and versed in the occult, could orchestrate such perfect conditions. Suddenly, Holmes rose and walked over to an old altar, where a vintage clock ticked softly in the background. He turned to me, his eyes deep and cold, as if staring straight into the spirit of our unseen enemy. We are facing a foe who is not only cunning but also utterly ruthless, someone who knows how to turn the forces of nature into weapons of terror. I couldn't help but shudder at the complexity and danger of the adversary we were tracking. Holmes continued. But the full moon cycle is also a weakness. If we understand it and time our actions precisely, we may be able to trap both the controller and the creature. He returned to the desk, took a blank sheet of paper, and began sketching out the lunar cycle, marking each disappearance by date and hour. His eyes shifted constantly between old evidence and new hypotheses. I asked, Holmes, then what must we prepare for the upcoming full moon? He replied. Our preparations must be flawless, down to the smallest detail. The controller will strike again, and this time, we will not let them escape. Holmes carefully organized the documents, rolled up maps and journals, and began preparing for the next leg of the journey, one that would take place under the cover of the approaching foggy night. The air around the castle suddenly grew ominously quiet, as if the very stones were waiting for a storm yet to come. Chapter 9, The Obscured Portrait. The darkest secrets often lie hidden within the oldest family portraits. Following the revelations about the full moon cycle and its mysterious connection to the disappearances, Holmes decided to examine every detail of Dunwich Castle more thoroughly, every nook and cranny of the shadowy past preserved within its walls. Aged family portraits lined the corridors, their painted eyes seeming to peer into the very souls of strangers, intensifying the oppressive atmosphere. In a rarely visited room, Holmes stopped before a large painting. It was an oil portrait of the family, rendered with elaborate technique. The figures wore classical attire, reflecting a noble lineage. But what drew Holmes's attention was a face in the center of the painting that had been scraped away, erased entirely. It wasn't the result of age or accident, but of a deliberate act. Holmes gently shone his flashlight on the back of the canvas. The old wooden frame revealed faint, erratic pencil markings that were still legible. The betrayer of blood. The summoner of darkness. He shuddered as he read the words. Each piece of the puzzle was forming a complete picture, one of terrible betrayal, directly tied to the Dunwich lineage and the dark secret the castle guarded. Holmes tilted his head, examining the defaced portrait more closely. He noticed the skin around the erased area was rough and uneven, indicating it had been scraped multiple times. It seemed someone had tried to completely erase the identity of this person from all memory. I asked. Could that person be the one behind all these horrific events? Holmes replied slowly. It's entirely possible. The inscription on the back of the painting is not just a curse, it's a warning about an internal enemy, a traitor to their own bloodline, one unafraid to plunge into darkness to achieve their aims. He continued. It's also likely this person was the one who summoned the monster, someone who used the dark forces of shadow and fractured souls to control that horrific creature. Holmes tapped gently on the frame with a small tool and discovered a hidden compartment inside. Carefully, he pulled out an aged, yellowed parchment scroll, fragile with time. On its surface were lines written in dark ink, not in any modern language, but in an ancient script nearly lost to history. Yet Holmes recognized some of the characters from engravings he had previously studied in the library. After a while decoding the script, Holmes said to me, "This scroll describes an ancient ritual, a dark oath taken by members of the family. It speaks of one who would sacrifice their soul to become the summoner of shadows in order to protect the family's power. But that sacrifice was also a curse, binding the family's fate to a soulless monster." I could feel the fragments coming together into a tragic story of betrayal, power, and the steep price of secrets buried too long. Holmes instructed, "We need to find more clues about the person whose face was erased from the painting. There may be records, letters, or other artifacts in the castle that can help us unravel this mystery." He looked at me with unwavering resolve. "Each revealed secret brings us closer to the true identity of the one hiding in the shadows, and sheds light on the darkness we must confront in our hunt for the monster." I could feel a heavy pressure in the room, as if the ghost of the past was present with us. Holmes carefully rolled the scroll, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it inside a leather pouch. He turned to look at the painting once more before leaving the room. That family portrait, its face erased, not only symbolized betrayal, but also stood as a dark warning of the cost of ambition and the unpredictable consequences of manipulating the forces of shadow. Chapter 10, The Ambush Under the Moon. In the darkness of the full moon night, the truth can be more terrifying than any nightmare. Holmes had prepared thoroughly. All day, he and I set up an ambush in the dense forest near Dunwich Castle, the place where the creature's traces most often appeared. Every step, every faint sound was carefully calculated so as not to alert the mysterious entity before the right moment arrived. As the full moon rose high, its silvery light filtered through the thick canopy, casting shifting patches of light and shadow on the forest floor. There was something peculiar about the atmosphere tonight. Every sound seemed to fall silent, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Suddenly, from a distance, a prolonged roar echoed, filled with strength and savagery. The growl came like an onrushing storm, shaking the entire forest. A massive shadow hurtled through the trees, rushing toward our ambush position. Holmes remained perfectly calm. His hand gripped a silver-coated firearm, a weapon specially prepared to combat supernatural forces. He signaled me to stay silent and alert. As the creature came into clearer view, I saw it was enormous, with a rugged form covered in thick black fur. Its razor-sharp claws sliced through the air, as if ready to tear apart everything in its path. The creature's labored breathing and foul stench made my skin crawl. Holmes raised his gun, took precise aim at the creature's shoulder, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. The silver bullet flew straight into its target. The beast let out a piercing, agonized scream, staggered, then collapsed to the ground. We approached, expecting the ambush to have succeeded. But what both Holmes and I witnessed left us stunned. The creature was not dead. Instead, it slowly raised its head, and in the moonlight, I saw that its eyes were not those of a monster. Those eyes, bright, filled with pain and madness, were the eyes of a human being shackled by a nightmare from which they could not escape. Holmes frowned, examined the creature's face more closely, and said to me in a low voice, "What I feared has come true. This is not merely a mindless beast. It is a deformed creature, controlled by some malevolent will. Its eyes reflect a fragment of a human soul, a soul consumed by darkness, imprisoned within this monstrous form." I asked Holmes, "Is it possible to save this creature? Or are we facing an inevitable death sentence?" Holmes sighed, his voice somber. "Saving it would not be easy, perhaps even impossible, when darkness has already rooted itself so deeply in its nature. But we must understand who is behind this, who is wielding this power of shadow." Holmes stepped closer, listening to the creature's labored breathing. Then, unexpectedly, he pulled from his pocket a small object, a pendant inscribed with ancient characters similar to those we had discovered in the underground chamber and the family portrait. He brought the pendant close to the creature's neck. A faint glow emanated from the object, and the beast tensed. In its eyes, a weak glimmer of light flickered, as if some part of it was awakening from the depths of delirium. Holmes said to me, "This pendant is the key, the last remaining link between the creature and the human it once was. If we can decipher and undo the curse attached to it, we may be able to free the imprisoned soul." We decided to bring the creature back to the castle and place it in a secure room, where Holmes would begin his search for the secrets buried deep within the layers of shadow. Tonight's full moon marked not just a deadly battle with a monster, but the first step in the hunt for the one who controls the darkness, hidden deep within the heart of Dunwich Castle. Chapter 11. Who is he? The danger does not lie in what we see, but in the one standing behind the mist, quietly pulling the strings of fate. Holmes sat at his desk, the light from the oil lamp casting pale golden spots over the specimen spread across the tabletop. Before him was a glass slide containing blood traces left at the crime scene in the dungeon of Dunwich Castle. He carefully analyzed the sample with sophisticated medical instruments. I stood beside him, watching his every focused movement, my heart tightening with tension. We both knew which clues might reveal the truth hidden deep within the darkness. But we also understood how perilous that truth could be. Holmes nodded slowly, his voice calm as usual yet carrying a profound seriousness. "This blood is not purely animal. It's a mixture of human cells and something alien, something that cannot be explained by conventional science." He set down the microscope, his eyes seeming to pierce through space and time as he silently pondered. I asked, "So, the monster is not the main culprit?" Holmes smiled faintly, a cold smile like a flickering light in the dark night. "The monster did not kill. In fact, it is merely a tool, a creature controlled by a malevolent will. The real killer, the one manipulating the darkness, is the true demon." Holmes rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the cold courtyard of the castle. The night wind rustled the trees, whispering eerie secrets. He continued, "And that one is hiding among us, disguised as an ordinary person, concealed so skillfully that even those close to him cannot recognize him." A chill ran down my spine. The thought that a demon might live normally within our community made it hard to breathe. Holmes turned back, his eyes sharp and resolute. "To unveil the secret, we must find the common thread in the disappearances and deaths, not only the timing but the hidden connections between the victims and those around them." He pulled out a map of the area and began marking related locations, connecting dots into a complex network. In Holmes's eyes, I saw an unshakable determination. He knew he was facing a force far from simple, a being not only intelligent but cunning and deeply malicious. We decided to return to the nearby small town, where living witnesses might harbor many secrets yet to be uncovered. Holmes intended to meet each one, carefully talk, probe every word and expression. I silently thought that perhaps the one controlling all of this was standing right beside us, quietly observing every step, waiting for the smallest mistake to destroy all evidence. One thing was certain, the hunt for the Master of Darkness was not merely a battle against monsters. It was a war against greed, betrayal, and evil hidden behind familiar faces. Holmes placed his hand on my shoulder, his voice warm but firm. "We will not let him escape. The light of truth will dispel the darkness, no matter the cost." The next phase of the investigation promised to reveal many more secrets, but also far greater dangers. The one behind the monsters was not only the manipulator, he was a living nightmare cloaked in the guise of peace. And most importantly, we must keep our reason and alertness sharp in this pitch-black night. Chapter 12, Returning to the Past of the Dunwich Family. In the darkness of old secrets always lurks the ghost of the past, and only when we dare to confront them can the truth gradually be revealed. Holmes carefully spread out on the table a faded genealogy book, its yellowed pages fragile as if they might crumble with time. The faded black ink recorded the history of the Dunwich family, a wealthy lineage yet full of mysteries no one dared to mention. It was a tale of an era when ancient rituals, considered heretical, had once deeply infiltrated the family's bloodline. I sat beside him, closely following every letter, every strange entry. Holmes pointed to a particular passage, his voice trembling slightly. One member of this family was once expelled from the castle for practicing dark rituals, occult arts that people called devilish schemes. That person's name was erased from the genealogy, treated like a filthy shadow that no one was allowed to speak of. The event had occurred more than a century ago, but its consequences still smoldered on to this day. Holmes tilted his head, studying more intently, his face growing sharper. He said, "He was not only expelled but also cursed, and what is terrifying is that such a curse can be passed down from generation to generation, creating a stain on the bloodline that can never be cleansed." Holmes took out an old, faded photograph of a man whose cold eyes were filled with ambition and hatred. This was the master of the dark ritual from that time. The Dunwich family had tried to hide this dark past, but Holmes believed those secrets could not be buried forever. He continued, "The descendants of that man might be the ones hiding, controlling the monster. A cunning individual who knows how to exploit darkness and fear to manipulate others." I felt a chill creeping through every word, but I also realized this was the key to breaking the veil of mystery. The past was not just memory, but a sentence, the root of all the crimes unfolding. Holmes emphasized, "We need to dig deeper into the timeline, the figures involved in this genealogy, to identify who is still alive and lurking in that shadow." The investigation began to open a journey across time, where the horrific secrets of the Dunwich family were exposed, and where every step was fraught with unforeseen dangers. The ghosts of the past gradually took shape, bringing with them tragic consequences and threats to the lives of the living. Holmes closed the genealogy book, his eyes shining like a guiding light piercing through the dense darkness of deceit and crime. We knew that to end this hunt, we had to confront that very ghost, the ghost of a family riddled with secrets, betrayal, and dark rituals. The journey back to the past had only just begun, but it would decide the fate of all. Chapter 13, The Door Leading to Darkness. There are doors that, when opened, not only reveal the truth but also lead us into the depths of darkness, where even the light of reason falters. Holmes stepped through the false wall in the deepest chamber of Dunwich Castle, a place no one dared to tread. Before him stretched a secret room, filled with bizarre symbols etched in dark red ink on stone, interspersed with the heavy stench of decay from old human skeletons stacked in layers. Each step Holmes took echoed through the gloomy space, making the air heavier and more suffocating. On an ancient stone shelf, a somber black leather-bound book lay silently, as if waiting to be discovered. It was no ordinary book. The coarse leather cover bore marks of time and dried blood. Though the pages inside had yellowed, they remained intact, preserved by a mysterious ink that time could not fade. Holmes carefully opened the book, his eyes fixed on the lines of text written in an ancient language, unlike any script he had ever encountered. The characters twisted and curled, seeming to carry not just meaning but also a dreadful power. Holmes muttered, "This is the language used to call forth darkness from the deepest abyss, to open a door for forces beyond human imagination." Alongside that, the symbols carved into the walls formed in his mind a map leading to ancient rites of death and control over powers beyond natural limits. Watson stood nearby, unable to hide his fear at the sight, but Holmes maintained the necessary calm. He knew that to understand the controller of the monster, one must understand the source of that power. In this room, every detail conveyed a message of destruction and domination through terror. The skeletons were not mere remains but symbols of imprisonment, of a curse that could never be broken. Holmes turned to me, his voice deep and resolute. "We have stepped into the heart of darkness. This is where the one behind everything must appear, or at least leave an indelible trace. This is also the place where the answers to all the mysteries of Dunwich Castle and the soulless monster await our discovery." The leather-bound book was carefully placed into Holmes's backpack. He decided to take it along for further study under safer light, where reason could analyze rather than fear. But he did not forget to warn me. We are touching a dangerous land, where every step could send us plunging into a bottomless abyss. Holmes closed the stone door, his gaze lingering on the blasphemous symbols carved deep into the rock, as if challenging fate itself. The darkness had been named, and now it only awaited its response. Chapter 14, He Controls with the Mind. There are powers not of the flesh, but of the mind, an invisible force that controls everything from the deepest darkness. After exploring the mysterious blasphemous chamber, Holmes returned to his study in Dunwich Castle. He sat down at the desk, stacking documents and notes around the strange leather-bound book, pondering the missing pieces of the case. The full moon was rising slowly through the small window, casting a faint, eerie light across the room, as if challenging every stubborn shred of reason. Holmes turned to me, his eyes sharp as a blade. He does not nurture the monster in the usual way, nor is he its master by physical chains. He links his mind with it, creating a dreadful possession. Every time the full moon appears, he enters into the creature's mind, and the monster becomes his arm, the tool that executes his will. A chill ran down my spine. That explained why the monster only appeared on full moon nights, and why its behavior was so cunning and brutal, far beyond mere animal instinct. Holmes stood up and moved toward the map hanging on the wall, where the locations of disappearances and mysterious events were carefully marked. The monster's appearances were not random but part of a precisely calculated cycle. The controller had planned every step meticulously, using the spiritual connection to command the creature, exploiting it to fulfill his ultimate purpose. Holmes continued. This connection is not simply superstition. It is a profound form of mental manipulation, using spiritual power to control a physical being beyond the capabilities of an ordinary human. According to the book we found, ancient rituals can create such bonds, and the one who remains most lucid during possession can completely control the creature. But that also means the controller cannot leave the monster's side. Once he loses control, he will be destroyed by the very creature. I asked. So who could do that? Who has enough power and madness to become the controller of this monster? Holmes gave a faint, bitter smile, his eyes deep. He is the bloodline traitor, the one we found on the family portrait with the face scratched out and the inscription carved on the back, the summoner of darkness. He hides within the community. How could we recognize him when he still lives like an ordinary person? We must delve deeper into the Dunwich lineage, into those once involved with the dark rituals, and most importantly, those who have recently acted strangely on full moon nights. Holmes looked out the window, where moonlight poured down, covering the entire castle in a misty veil. Everything became clear. The true culprit was not just the monster outside, but a human being who uses mind and darkness to control it, manipulating life and death in his hands. The story is far from over, it has only just begun, because to defeat the darkness, we must confront the one who created it face to face. Chapter 15, The Final Trap. There are moments when a person must stand at the abyss of life and death, where only recklessness and determination can pull them back into the light. Holmes had prepared the final trap. The ancient forest surrounding Dunwich Castle, where the old trees twisted like ghosts in the wind, was the stage he chose for the ultimate confrontation with the monster's controller. The entire previous night, we reread every page of the scriptures, every line describing the summoning ritual in the strange leather-bound book we found in the secret chamber. Holmes carefully scrutinized every detail, instructing me to stay by his side and never take my eyes off anything for even a second. He explained the plan clearly. By recreating the very spiritual signal the controller once used to call the monster, we would lure him out of the shadows, force him to re-enter the creature's mind, so that we could detect and capture him. As night fell, the full moon shone brightly in the sky, with not a cloud in sight, signaling an inevitable fate. I followed Holmes deep into the forest, our footsteps silent on the decayed leaf litter, blending into the whispering wind through the ancient trunks. Holmes began chanting the incantation he had memorized, his voice echoing through the stillness like a challenge to the darkness. The whispers in the wind grew into groans, and then from the shadows, the giant monster appeared. Its form was bathed in moonlight, eyes flashing with savagery, its growls reverberating through the forest. The moment the creature lunged forward, Holmes quickly pulled the trigger of a silver-covered pistol. The bullet pierced the monster's flesh, but as before, it did not fall. Then, from behind a tree, a human figure suddenly stepped out, walking with confidence and power. The controller had revealed himself. He raised his hand, unleashing a powerful wave that made Holmes and me stagger. I felt an invisible pressure crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. At that instant, the monster charged at me with a lethal strike. I dodged hastily, but pain spread as sharp claws raked my arm. Blood flowed, burning hot, but I could not afford to collapse. Holmes reacted swiftly, chanting spells from the book, creating a radiant protective circle around us that blocked the creature's attacks. The battle was not merely physical but also a spiritual war, between human will and dark power. I saw determination clearly etched on Holmes's face. He hesitated not, though the cost might be great. The controller tried to use his mental power to command the monster to attack again, but Holmes had prepared a trap, a special silver arrow, shot while uttering a particular incantation. The arrow pierced straight through the monster's chest, a brilliant white light erupted fiercely, causing the creature to roar in agony before dissolving into black smoke, vanishing into the darkness. The controller, cut off from his spiritual link to the monster, staggered and then collapsed to the ground. Holmes rushed forward and used a special set of handcuffs to bind his hands. I was still gasping for breath, my arm bleeding and aching after the fight. In the dim moonlight, Holmes looked down at the man who had caused so much terror. He was no longer a shadowy mystery in the dark. He was captured, and with the truth revealed, Dunwich would gradually be freed from its dark ghost. But the price was high, nearly losing my life under the monster's claws. I silently thought that perhaps some mysteries, some deep powers of darkness, should never be drawn too close by mankind. Because sometimes, to preserve life, one must be willing to sacrifice far more than we imagine. Chapter 16, The Mask Falls. Some truths only reveal themselves when the final mask falls away, leaving before our eyes a horrifying entity that cannot be denied. After the terrifying ambush on the night of the full moon, when the monster was driven away and the controller was bound in the special handcuffs, Holmes stood silently, gazing at the man in the dim light of the oil lamps. This was no stranger, it was the quiet secretary, the one who had been by Holmes's side throughout their days in Dunwich, the very person no one suspected, not even Holmes himself. The man slumped to the floor, his eyes flickering with a mixture of madness and extreme confidence. He muttered vaguely about a divine mission, about being the final messenger of darkness. Every word stabbed into my mind, painting the image of someone who had completely lost the boundary between reality and shadow. Recalling the early days in Dunwich, he had appeared normal, always bowing his head, speaking little, working quietly, recording everything Holmes requested. Who could have guessed that the one who stood beside us throughout the investigation was the very controller behind all the horrors that had unfolded? Holmes, with his keen gaze, began to interrogate him. The man did not deny anything, in fact, he seemed liberated as he revealed all. This madman believed he had been chosen by the power of darkness, entrusted with the mission to spread fear and to control the monstrous creature to take revenge on the forces he thought had abandoned the Dunwich bloodline. He told of a shadowed past, of frenzied study of ancient texts, of long sleepless nights in the secret chamber where darkness was like a companion, a god whispering dreadful commands into his ear. Every story he told sent chills down my spine, a blend of sharp intellect and a rotting soul within. He was a man, yet seemed long dead inside, replaced by a spiritual ghost bound tightly to the dark power. Holmes listened carefully, each explanation becoming a clue that helped him better understand how the controller used spiritual links to bond with the monster, deceiving us step by step and hiding the truth right before our eyes. The small room grew suffocating as the man began speaking in veiled terms about plans yet to be fulfilled, about a day he would return to let darkness spread across Dunwich and the entire world. Holmes quickly realized that the capture could not end here. This madman needed to be tightly controlled. He could not be allowed to continue manipulating with that dark intellect. I sat beside Holmes, feeling a cold shiver as I thought about how deeply the man had hidden himself, carefully steering the investigation from the start to ensure no one could bring him into the light. But the ultimate truth was finally revealed, and it was the first time in my life I saw Holmes unable to hide the astonishment and regret in his eyes. We knew this was not the end but a dangerous new turning point, where the real enemy was not the monster but the human hidden in the darkness. The story of Dunwich was no longer just a murder case, it was a battle between light and darkness within the human mind. I wondered what we would have to face in the coming days when the most trusted person turned out to be the deadliest enemy. Holmes bowed his head, continuing to plan and prepare for the challenges ahead. As for me, I could not take my eyes off the man standing before us, the man who had donned the mad mask of darkness. Chapter 17, The Battle of Will. Some battles do not need the thunder of gunfire, but are tense struggles of minds between light and darkness, reason and madness. Holmes knew full well that facing the controller trapped in that mad body could not be done by sheer force alone. The monster was merely a tool, the true enemy was the will and mind of the person striving to fully merge with the darkness. The final ritual was about to be performed in the dark cellar, where the howling wind echoed like an ancient curse. In that moment, Holmes was no longer the calm detective but a warrior of intellect, preparing for a fierce spiritual battle. Watson stood by his side, eyes fixed, sensing every change in the air heavy with the scent of sulfur and burnt grass. The cellar became the battlefield of ideas, intertwined persuasion, and the low moaning of rising darkness. Holmes spoke to the controller in a steady, deep voice, each word like a sharp dagger piercing the shell of madness, rekindling the remaining sparks of light within the man's soul. The madman responded with twisted logic and calls to darkness and unlimited power. But the more he tried to persuade, the more he revealed his turmoil, the tug of war between the human and the demon within. Holmes skillfully guided the conversation, presenting evidence, memories, and human values long forgotten by the controller. He spoke of family, lineage, and days before darkness had veiled him. Each word was like a small flame chasing away the thick night. The battle of minds reached its peak as the controller tried to perform the ritual, clasping his hands, chanting incomprehensible spells. A freezing chill engulfed the room, and the monster beneath the earth began to stir, its roar echoing deeply. Holmes relentlessly countered with perseverance, refusing to let the darkness sweep away the human will. Watson held a flashlight, shining light on the blasphemous symbols on the walls, making them glow as if reflecting Holmes's spiritual strength. Time seemed to freeze in that moment, leaving only the sound of inner whispers and the pounding of anxious hearts. Finally, through relentless patience and sharp intellect, Holmes gradually weakened the darkness's hold on the controller. The man began to tremble, his eyes losing their madness, returning to sadness and regret. The monster's roar faded to a weak growl and then silence, the darkness dissipating in the faint light. The battle of will ended. Holmes gently helped the controller regain his consciousness, not as a tool of darkness, but as a human being, shattered but still whole in the fragments of his past. Watson exhaled in relief, understanding that brute strength could not solve everything. Sometimes, reason and patience were the sharpest weapons. Holmes stood in the cellar, gazing toward the dim light at the doorway, knowing that darkness would never truly disappear, but humans could always choose how to fight. The next part will reveal the consequences following the battle, and the unexpected return of past shadows in Dunwich's story. How would you like me to continue? Chapter 18, The Screaming from the Abyss. In the dark world of Dunwich, a harsh truth always exists: when evil loses its controller, it becomes chaos, a force impossible to control. Holmes stood at the entrance of the cellar where the fierce battle of wills had just taken place, observing the darkness outside the forest gradually turning restless. The screams echoing from the abyss were not human but the terrifying sounds of a creature completely severed from the spiritual bond that once tethered it to its master. It was now like a wild storm, escaping control, rushing into the deep woods like an unstoppable fury. Watson shuddered at the sound, a noise both chaotic and agonizing, like the cry of a lost soul writhing in endless darkness. Holmes tilted his head thoughtfully and finally uttered a sharp conclusion: chaos is the true nature of evil once it loses its controller. In the following minutes, the two silently studied the traces the monster left on the damp ground. Large footprints, torn grass, and broken branches revealed tremendous power and untamable wildness. With no cunning left, no spiritual coordination, it had become pure instinct, destruction and panic incarnate. Holmes analyzed that before, the monster only acted under the controller's commands, a tool trained by a mysterious spiritual link. But when that bond was broken, the creature lost its way, like a broken machine that could no longer receive orders, leaving only intrinsic chaos. Watson wondered if it was possible to recapture the uncontrollable beast, or if it would vanish forever into the dense forest, becoming a new terrifying legend of Dunwich. Holmes answered with a wry but cautious smile that this was precisely his new challenge. For when evil loses its controller, it does not retreat naturally, it can cause unpredictable devastation and inspire widespread fear and confusion. Holmes and Watson prepared to venture into the dense darkness, following the haunting screams from the abyss, where the monster's chaos had yet to subside. This pursuit was not merely a physical battle but a struggle to understand the nature of an uncontrollable demon, an embodiment of unpredictable chaos. The journey into darkness began as night fell, with fog blanketing the ground, merging with the whistle of the wind through ancient trees. Holmes carried specialized equipment, ready for any dangerous situation, while Watson stood firm beside him, prepared to face the strangest phenomena. Along the winding path through the ancient forest, they discovered fresh traces that only a creature of enormous size could leave. Broken branches lay scattered, and several small animal carcasses torn apart bore witness to the beast's wildness and savage brutality. Holmes speculated that the monster was not just a ferocious creature but carried within it a wild, fierce soul no one could control without the spiritual link. And once severed, it became a source of boundless chaotic energy. As they moved forward, they heard strange noises, heavy breathing, rustling leaves, and sometimes weak growls. Holmes stared into the darkness ahead, sensing the presence of something enormous moving through the woods, a creature lost to rage and panic. Watson asked if there was any way to help the monster return to normalcy, so it would no longer be a danger to anyone. Holmes pondered that perhaps they would need to find a way to restore the link or somehow soothe the chaos within its soul. But this would be extremely difficult and perilous, for evil had been set loose, no longer under control. As the night deepened, they discovered an area near the abyss where the screams echoed more clearly, like the agonized cries of a creature in pain, wild and desperate. Holmes decided to approach this area for closer investigation. Stepping into the dense darkness, they found fresher, clearer traces, perhaps where the monster had rested or even tried to hide. Dry bloodstains scattered on the ground told of an internal battle within the beast's soul, a struggle between wild instinct and the remaining shred of humanity. Holmes quietly remarked that although it seemed like a soulless creature, deep inside there might still be a flicker of light, a faint will that could be harnessed to prevent a greater disaster. And to do so, they would have to delve deeper into the heart of darkness, confronting pains and secrets no one dared face. The quest to find the monster was far from over, and the greatest challenge still awaited. Holmes and Watson understood that chaos was not only a destructive force but a sign of something deeper, a story yet untold about the distortion of the soul and dark power. With steady steps, they continued deeper into the forest, following the screams from the abyss, a testament that when evil loses its controller, it becomes an unstoppable fury, and only intellect and courage can face and contain that darkness. Chapter 19, The Sealed Case. In a world existing on the boundary between reality and darkness, there are truths that should remain buried deep in silence, for sometimes revealing them can bring about greater disasters than anything that has already occurred. The Dunwich case, a grim mystery involving monsters, dark rituals, and unnatural spirits, was officially sealed in history by the authorities through decisive and ruthless measures. Immediately after Holmes and Watson returned with clear evidence, the government ordered a complete lockdown of the entire Dunwich area. Roads leading into the small town were blocked off, residents were forbidden from leaving or entering, the press was banned from reporting there. And anyone who attempted to cross the boundary was considered a lawbreaker. Police and military forces were deployed to maintain order and, at the same time, to conceal the truth that the public was not meant to know. The most remarkable part of the government's decision was the handling of the occult book found in the secret chamber of the castle. The book, bound in rough leather and inscribed with mysterious symbols and strange languages, contained not only dark summoning rituals but also was the source of every calamity that had occurred. The decision to burn the book on sight, witnessed by numerous officials and experts, took place during a stormy night, as if attempting to erase every trace of that dark past. Fierce flames devoured every page, every arcane character, sending black smoke billowing into the night sky. It was said that as the pages burned, the wind howled with strange sounds, like the lament of released darkness. Yet no one could deny that this event officially ended a part of the horrifying story of Dunwich. Meanwhile, the controller, the silent secretary who had once hidden behind a mask of normalcy, was sent directly to a mental institution reserved only for the most dangerous psychiatric patients. There, he was no longer an ordinary human being. All memories of his former identity seemed erased by the chaos of his mind and the darkness within. Day after day, he repeated a single phrase, like an inescapable haunting chorus that chilled anyone who heard it. That phrase was a reminder that the dreadful link had not been entirely broken, that a mysterious power was still waiting to be summoned again. Though imprisoned within the cold walls of the asylum, his soul remained immersed in darkness, and the obsession with the monster haunted him every moment. The police chief in charge of the case faced pressure from higher authorities, tasked with keeping every dangerous detail secret, even though deep down they knew the threats were far from resolved. This was not an ending but only a pause in the ongoing battle against incomprehensible forces. Holmes and Watson returned to London in silence, carrying a heavy feeling, not from success, but from unanswered questions. Holmes knew that burning the book was only temporary, for dark knowledge always finds a way to survive, in one form or another, waiting for curious or dangerous minds to uncover it again. Watson recorded the entire event in his journals, but even he felt a chill whenever mentioning the Dunwich case. It was not merely a detective story but a door opening to a world of darkness where truth and illusion intertwined, and evil never truly vanished, only waiting for a chance to return. The Dunwich area afterward became a forbidden zone that no one dared approach. Survivors fled, houses lay abandoned, and the wind whispering through the trees seemed to retell the terrifying tale of old. Some elders in the region still recounted stories of darkness, monsters, and forbidden rituals, warning younger generations to avoid the place as if it were a curse. Holmes silently thought that the case would be remembered for many years, not only for its mystery and horror but also for the lesson about human limits when facing uncontrollable forces. He sensed that deep shadows would always exist in the world, and his mission was not just to uncover the truth but also to keep the world from being swallowed by those dark whirlpools. Watson asked whether they should reveal everything publicly to warn humanity, but Holmes shook his head, emphasizing that sometimes silence and secrecy are the best ways to protect others from dangerous temptations. Some secrets are meant to exist in darkness because light can awaken forces beyond human control. Thus, the Dunwich case was officially closed on paper, a case sealed by power and fear, yet never truly ended in the shadows. Holmes and Watson prepared to face new challenges, but the memory of Dunwich and the screams from the abyss would forever haunt their minds, reminding them that evil is never completely erased, only waiting to be reborn in another form. In Holmes's heart, one certainty remained: this temporary peace was not the end but merely a part of the vast picture of a world full of mysteries and unexplored darkness. And when one day those shadows rise again, he would be ready to confront them, armed with reason and the steadfast resolve of a great detective. Chapter 20: The Hunt is Not Over. In a world of mysteries and shadows, the truth is never final, it is only the beginning of a long and arduous journey. Holmes returned to his familiar room on Baker Street, where he had solved countless complex cases, and where the pieces of the hunt for the Dunwich monster continued to reveal secrets never known before. Night fell, and the flickering candlelight created an atmosphere both cozy and charged with immeasurable tension. Holmes, with deep and thoughtful eyes, withdrew an old envelope from his coat pocket and carefully opened it. Inside was a strange, dark-colored fur sample unlike any animal hair he had ever seen. The specimen was kept in a small pouch, apparently preserved with great care, but its origin remained a mystery. Holmes leaned closer to the candlelight, examining each hair strand with absolute focus, as if it contained the most crucial clue of the investigation. He murmured in a low voice that echoed through the room, "We have only caught the first one. There are many others, waiting." These words were not just a warning but an admission that the Dunwich case was far from over as everyone believed. The darkness that had been temporarily dispelled was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the veil of the world, mysterious creatures, and those who controlled them still existed, silently waiting for an opportunity to rise again. Watson stood silently beside him, his eyes shining with a mix of worry and curiosity. He knew that although the Dunwich case ended with the capture of the controller, Holmes never accepted such an easy conclusion. His curiosity and thirst for justice continually drove him to seek the truth to its very end. Holmes began analyzing the fur sample using the most sophisticated scientific methods he knew. Under the microscope, he discovered unusual characteristics. The hair's structure bore not only the traces of a strange creature but also biological markers difficult to explain, like a hybridization between different species. This indicated that what they were dealing with was not a simple monster but possibly the product of a transformation process or a dark ritual involving both science and mysticism. Holmes called upon experts in anatomy and biology and sent the fur for deeper analysis in secret laboratories. The results he received gave him much to ponder. The specimen contained previously unknown chemical compounds, an unusual enzyme capable of altering the DNA structure of organisms, enabling them to morph flexibly according to the will of the controller. This information opened a new and dangerous door. Holmes realized that the dark rituals and occult books were not merely legends but might have been combined with modern science to create a new form of life, both a monster and a mental weapon for the controller. While Holmes was engrossed in his research, a series of strange events began to occur in London. Wild animals appeared unnaturally, roars echoed in the night, and residents near deep forest areas reported shadowy figures moving swiftly like lightning. Mysterious disappearances also started increasing, filling the city with a suffocating atmosphere of fear. Holmes and Watson quickly realized that Dunwich was not the only place affected by this darkness. The shadow of the controller, or perhaps several controllers, had spread everywhere, ready to sow new terror. Holmes began planning a broader investigation, preparing equipment, gathering trusted allies, and establishing secret observation posts in suspicious areas. He knew this time they were not facing just a single monster but possibly a complex network of creatures and controllers operating in the shadows. Watson accompanied him as always, not only a friend but also a firm emotional support, always ready to stand by Holmes facing unprecedented dangers. Their conversations about spiritual theories, science, and mystical phenomena became more frequent, helping them understand their enemy more deeply and prepare mentally for the challenges ahead. One night, as moonlight streamed through the study window, Holmes received a mysterious letter with no clear sender. Inside was a small piece of paper bearing ancient symbols and a brief message: the door was never closed. This meant the dark rituals were still being performed somewhere, and a new controller had never ceased. Holmes understood that the hunt was far from over. Darkness was still lurking, and he and Watson had to act quickly before everything spiraled out of control. With determined resolve, Holmes prepared to embark on a new journey, not only to uncover the deepest secrets of the shadow world but also to protect the world from the rise of dark forces beyond human imagination. By the flickering candlelight, Holmes looked once more at the strange fur sample before carefully locking it away in a secret box. He silently vowed that this was not just a clue to a case but the key to opening a door to the unknown, where the battle between light and darkness would continue forever. Watson stood nearby, eyes fixed on his detective friend with absolute trust. They did not know what awaited them ahead, but one thing was certain: they would never give up, because in the darkness, there is always a glimmer of light, and Holmes was the torchbearer leading the way to the truth. And so, the new hunt began, opening a new chapter full of drama, danger, and endless mysteries in the dark world of Dunwich, and beyond.